inclinata.
Ho capito. C'è gente, ascolti, c'è gente che sta scendendo dalla biscaggina di prua. Lei quella biscaggina la percorre in senso inverso, sale sulla nave e mi dice quante persone e che cosa hanno a bordo, chiaro? Mi dice se ci sono bambini, donne o persone bisognose di assistenza e mi ne dice il numero di ciascuna di queste categorie. È chiaro? Guardi, Schettino, che lei si è salvato forse dal mare, ma io la porto veramente molto male, faccio passare l'anima dei guai. Vado a bordo, cazzo!
The Costa Concordia, the most infamous cruise disaster to happen since the Titanic. The ship that sank off the coast of Italy was supposed to be a sight to behold and a symbol of wonder and innovation. But what really happened? Let us look at the actual cruise and the story that would go down in history as the biggest bottle job that is almost too unbelievable to be true.
Lei non deve fare altre valutazioni, lei ha dichiarato l'abbandono nave. Adesso comando io. Lei vada a bordo.
Welcome back to PST Mega Constructions. The Costa Concordia was the latest cruise ship that belonged to Carnival Corporation, a whole new class of cruise ships that revolutionized and set the new standard for cruise lines around the world. The ship cost $570 million to build, and it was the largest cruise ship in the world at the time. The Concordia was a staggering 952 feet long, boasting a beam of 116 feet and a total of 13 public decks. At top speed, the cruise reaches 23 knots. To put it simply, the Costa Concordia was the best they had to offer. To be extra, the ship had a 2-story spa as well as 4 swimming pools, including an outdoor pool with a built-in movie screen. There was also a kids and family pool with slides and everything you need to feel like you're in an aqua park. But all of that is just what was on deck, and above, we didn't even begin to fathom what they had going on below. Below deck, there was a total of 5 grand restaurants. There were 13 bars, just so you can get drunk at a different one twice a day for the whole week. The cruise displayed a grand atrium that stood 10 stories high. This was the pinnacle of cruise ships. Inside, there was a total of 1,502 guest cabins to accommodate the overwhelming number of passengers it held. There were an additional 601 crew cabins to hold the staff required for all of this to operate. The ship's capacity to hold people was at 4,890. It's like the ship had its own population. If this was a different time and you saw the cruise from ashore, you would think that they would land and invade your land. To add to their battalion, Carnival Corporation ordered an additional 5 ships to join the fleet of the world's most elite cruise line. The Costa Concordia was launched in 2006, and it was captained by the Italian Francesco Schettino, who is going to be the main star of our story later on in this video, but that will be much later. For the next several years, the Concordia safely sailed the Mediterranean until 2012, when everything changed. Not just for the Concordia, but the entire future of cruise ships around the world. The ship was scheduled for a normal 7-day Mediterranean cruise on January 11th of 2012. It sailed around a few towns and briefly stopped in Sicily before the action would begin. On Friday the 13th, as if it was destined for something horrendous to happen on the scariest night of the whole year, the Concordia arrived in Italy and was making its way to Savona. The official course drawn was supposed to take the ship right in the middle, between Italy's mainland and the island of Giglio. However, the captain decided to do a drive-by and deviated from his course. They were going to go much closer to the island in what is regularly known as a drive-by salute, where the passengers are given a much closer and nicer view of the island, and they can salute the people of the island and have them wave back to them. This was nothing new. In fact, the same captain did the same thing before with the same boat, and it always went with no harm. Not this time, though. It was nightfall, and the captain had left orders to the rest of his crew before heading out to have dinner. His instructions were to deviate a bit from their course, to have the ship be exactly 1,500 meters away from the shore. At around 9:40 p.m., the ship was cruising at around 15 knots. When the captain had returned, he discovered the grave mistake that happened. There was a bit of miscommunication between the captain and his crew, which made them bring the cruise 659 meters closer to shore. The problem is, he wasn't there to see it or correct the mistake. The course was left as it was until it was too late. Immediately, he ordered the crew to turn the ship 20 degrees to the right, as the course was set for them to crash. Unfortunately, they collided with underwater rocks that scrapped along the ship, leaving a 60-meter gash within the hull of the ship. It caused several breaches within the watertight compartments of the ships, and from there on, everything quickly went downhill. They lost power in their generators as well as full loss of propulsion from their two engines. Everyone started panicking as the emergency generators kicked in, and the mass panic did not help the situation at all. Eventually, 3 compartments were breached, and the water found its way all the way to the main electrical panel. Even though the Concordia was contacted by emergency services, as well as the Coast Guard by the harbor, they refused to cooperate and claimed that it was only a blackout. During the entirety of the situation, the ship only contacted the company emergency center and only told them the severity of the issue. The rest of the world, including the passengers, were completely left in the dark and lied to. Instead of reaching out for help, the captain decided to take matters into his own hands. The ship was already drifting without control due to the loss of both engines and loss of all power. The captain decided to allow the ship to drift freely into the shallow waters instead of leaving it out in the deeper areas. This would turn out to be the only good decision made by anyone in this entire situation. In a worst-case scenario, the crews will only rest in the shallow parts instead of sinking to the bottom. As this was happening, the ship's pumps failed, and it started to flood from the inside to make matters worse. Still, they didn't contact anyone for help and still kept the passengers in the dark. Finally, at around 10:30 p.m., they admitted defeat and decided that they must abandon the ship as it was sinking. Now the issue here was that the ship held a staggering amount of 4,229 people. And you can imagine what an evacuation within a small space would look like, especially when there is a mass panic going around. After some time, the ship was completely resting on its side, with half of it being completely submerged underwater. This blocked out half of their rescue boats from being used, and they were now working at half capacity to evacuate everyone. There were also people who were trapped inside and needed to be rescued, aside from the 4,000 people on top of the ship waiting to be helped. As you know the famous saying, the captain sinks with his ship, or at least until everyone else is rescued. What had actually happened was, the captain was nowhere to be found on board. He was one of the first people who fled away from the ship and quickly made his escape to shore, along with a random woman he was having an affair with. The Coast Guard was baffled as they were trying to contact the captain to help the people. They ordered him to return to his ship and make sure that everyone was rescued. They tried to explain to him that people were still trapped, becoming increasingly aggressive with him, and even threatening him with criminal prosecution for refusing direct orders and abandoning his post. Regardless of the captain's actions, the Coast Guard as well as the people of the island were helping out the passengers of the ship, with the people even taking them into their homes. When the sun had finally risen, it was finally revealed the true extent of the damage done to the ship, and how big of a disaster this actually was. Tragically, 32 people had died as they were stuck in the submerged section while it was flooded. There were also bodies found inside elevators. When it was finally over, the situation resulted in a $500 million loss. A salvage operation was held out to retrieve the ship. Devices were installed on top of the ship, as well as other tools to help it float and make it stand up straight again. Only when this was done did the true damage done to the ship appear. Everything on the side was crushed by the sheer weight of the ship, and everything inside looked like it just came out of an earthquake. The Concordia was labeled as a total loss by the company, and it was dragged on to its final voyage to the port of Genoa. Ultimately, the ship was broken down and sold as scrap metal. With the refunds and reparations, the whole thing resulted in a staggering $1.2 billion loss. Several people were tried and sentenced to prison, including the person in charge of the crisis control for the company who was aware of what was happening and ignored it. The captain of the ship argued in court that he should not be held responsible for the deaths of the people, as it was not a direct result of the initial impact on the rocks. He also tried to explain his actions for abandoning the ship by claiming that he slipped and fell on one of the rescue boats, but thankfully a video appeared to disprove this completely believable lie by him. The video showed him very casually and deliberately going on a rescue boat. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison for manslaughter, refusing orders, and abandoning his post. In the end, this was one of the most pointless catastrophes to ever happen. It would have been a laughing matter if not for the tragic passing of 32 people. What makes it even sadder is that the whole thing really didn't need to happen, and even after the accident, it could have been avoided if they just reached out for help instead of lying to keep face. That is everything for now. What do you think of the Costa Concordia and the entire story? Do you think the tragedy was down to pure safety measures or just plain human error? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you haven't, please subscribe and leave a like for this video. Your support helps us continue our work. Thanks again for your support, and I will see you in the next one.